Donald's hostile takeover of Washington, D.C. continues apace and as intended, and he and his regime are doing everything in their power to paint our nation's capital as a hellhole of crime and horror. Donald is basically throwing the kitchen sink at Washington, D.C. He's throwing the Justice Department, the Metropolitan Police, and probably worst of all, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. In her most recent press conference in the White House press room, Leavitt went on a diatribe about our nation's capital, throwing out quote unquote stats and facts in order to fit her boss's narrative. Take a look.
President Trump's efforts to make D.C. safe again are working. There have been a total of 465 arrests since the start of this operation on Thursday, August 7th. Last night, there were a total of 52 arrests, including the arrest of an illegal alien MS-13 gang member with convictions for DWI and drug possession. 4 more homeless encampments were also removed during yesterday's reporting period. To date, a total of 48 homeless encampments have been cleared in Washington, D.C. by multi-agency teams. And despite fake narratives from the media again, a significant number of the arrests have been in high-crime areas of D.C. In fact, nearly half of all of the non-illegal alien-related arrests have occurred in Wards 7 and 8, the 2 wards that have the highest number of violent crime, as well as homicides and assaults with dangerous weapons last year. So while Democrats continue to coddle violent criminals, President Trump and this administration are focused on putting them behind bars and unapologetically standing up for the safety of law-abiding American citizens.
Homelessness is not a crime, you vile creature. It is quite stunning to me that somebody so young is already such a practiced and grotesque liar. Her parents must be so proud. Leavitt was asked about Donald's wanting to break up the so-called DC slums, and it was easy to read between the lines about the motivations of the Trump regime in DC. Watch this.
He mentioned getting rid of the slums where criminals live. Was he talking about tents or permanent residential buildings?
What you said, and the president said, the slums of Washington, D.C., he's referring to the most dangerous communities, neighborhoods, and streets in the city where, unfortunately, violence has ravaged these communities and taken the lives of, again, far too many law-abiding D.C. residents. We know on July 5th of this year, just more than a month ago, a 3-year-old beautiful young girl was shot and killed in her car with her family in one of these communities, which is why there has been a surge, despite what many of you have been falsely reporting. And I believe it was the Washington Post who put out a map claiming it to be fact-based when it was just based on, I don't know, accounts that they've heard on the street, not actual statistics and data. So we went and reconfigured the numbers. And as I said, nearly half of all the non-illegal alien-related arrests have occurred in wards 7 and 8 in the District of Columbia, where we know, excuse me, there's the highest rate of crime. So we'll continue to do that.
It shouldn't surprise you. Caroline Leavitt has her facts mixed up because, as it turns out, the place in Washington, D.C. with the highest crime rate is the White House. The most practiced criminal in America lives in the White House. The guy who's gotten away with the most crimes in America lives in the White House. So maybe they should clean that house if they want to lower the rate of crime in Washington, D.C. But of course, that is not what they want to do. She keeps talking about these high crime areas. Wonder who lives in these so-called slums. Yeah, that would be low-income Black and brown residents of the city. Axios reports that the 2 wards Leavitt mentioned are home to many of the low-income and working-class majority Black neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. So what's Donald trying to do here? Well, on the one hand, he's trying, as always, to distract from the fact that, according to his own DOJ, he was mentioned multiple times in the Epstein files that Donald is trying so desperately to keep out of the sight of the American people. He's also trying, of course, to distract from the failing economy for which he is entirely responsible. At the same time, it's fun for him to punish and incarcerate as many non-white Americans as he can. Why? Well, because most obviously, he's a horrible racist. But also, he wants to punish all of us in blue cities who don't support him, who indeed hate him, who see him for the insurrectionist, traitor, and criminal and rapist that he is. It just so happens that Washington, D.C. is the most vulnerable blue city in America because, unfortunately, despite the fact that Washington, D.C. has a higher population than Wyoming and Rhode Island, Washington, D.C. is not a state and doesn't have proper representation. Donald is going as far as possible, as I said earlier, to make people who believe him think that DC is an inherently violent city, that it is in fact more violent than any other place on the planet, in order to justify his hostile takeover. Donald's Department of Justice has been under fire for its unwillingness to investigate and release information regarding Jeffrey Epstein and Donald's potential involvement in the Epstein files. But as it turns out, it is not a department-wide issue. This is just an Epstein issue. Because when it comes to trying to discredit the DC police, the DOJ has moved very swiftly. So, in other words, they're basically just dragging their feet in this one area. Why? Because Donald wants them to. The U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. has opened an investigation into whether city police officials falsified crime data, and they have done this at the direction of U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro, who is most broadly known as somebody who used to host a show on Fox and lie a lot. Donald has been claiming for days that the D.C. crime data were inaccurate. But of course, as always, he had no facts to back that up. He just thinks if he says it, people should believe it's true. And now he's using the legal system once again to come after his political enemies and attempt to give his lies validity. Ironically enough, in April, the same U.S. Attorney's Office that is investigating the city's crime data openly praised a 25% drop in violent crime in Washington in the first 100 days of Donald's administration. So, which is it? Is crime higher or is crime lower in DC? Are the numbers real? Are they fake? Is it a witch hunt? Is it a hoax? Well, it depends on what Donald prefers as the narrative. He wants people to believe that DC is a horribly violent place because he wants an excuse to abuse his federal authority and take that city over. Donald cannot help but lie about DC in order to excuse those abuses of power. And he is doing everything in his power to push a narrative that could not be further from the truth. During his meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky this week, he boasted that DC's economy was thriving since he began cracking down on crime, which is so absurd, I don't even know where to begin. But first, take a look at the clip.
He said, what you've done is incredible. And I think the people realize it. But the press says, he's a dictator, he's trying to take over. No, all I want is security for our people. But people that haven't gone out to dinner in Washington, D.C. in 2 years are going out to dinner. And the restaurants the last 2 days were busier than they've been in a long time.
No, that is blatantly false. According to WUSA 9, a local DC news station, reservations at DC restaurants are plummeting and are already down by a mind-boggling 25%. They report, quote, on Monday, the day Donald announced he would invoke the DC Home Rule Act and federalize the city's police department for the first time in history, online reservations in the district dropped by 16% compared to the same date in 2024, according to data from OpenTable. On Tuesday, as the National Guard began being mobilized in the district, reservations were 27% below their 2024 levels. On Wednesday, they were down 31%, unquote. This is not normal for an August in DC. Almost all large American cities have seen an August dining boom, but DC has seen the worst drop in August dining reservations among the 20 largest US cities. For a man who ran on bringing us an economic boom, he is quite adept at destroying every aspect of the economy he has power over. I was visiting DC a lot back in the spring of this year, and I got into an Uber. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. The Uber driver had been on duty since 10 o'clock that morning. I was his first fare. During that cab ride, the driver told me that he had seen a report stating that by the end of 2025, 60% of DC restaurants would be out of business. DC residents know how bad all of this is for the city. The fact that the Trump regime was taking over again was bad enough. But now, the presence of a militarized National Guard, the checkpoints that have been set up to stop people randomly, the profiling that's being done are taking a toll. Take a look at NBC Washington's report.
We begin tonight with President Trump's latest efforts to take over law enforcement in D.C.
This weekend, the governor of South Carolina pledged to send 200 National Guard troops to the district, West Virginia, 300 to 400 troops, and Ohio, 150 troops. Some district residents tell News 4 they are not happy.
I don't want our city to become a police state. I just think it's wrong.
We should be focusing on protecting people who need protecting, and I feel like we should be using this energy towards something else that will be more impactful.
Janine Pirro telling Fox News district residents should be grateful.
They want to march and protest. You know what? They should kiss the ground at this point that you've got someone who wants to make the city safe again, who wants to make it clean again.
Shut up. DC residents are not grateful that they're losing businesses. They're not grateful that they can't leave the house without seeing military personnel pulling people over for no reason. They're not grateful that the White House press room has basically become a daily crime blotter. They are not grateful that they have to live in fear. But again, Donald is pushing a preferred narrative so that he and the Republican Party can accrue more power. And here's the problem. So far, it looks like Republicans in Congress, who could, quite frankly, put a stop to this at any point, are going to let Donald continue to do whatever he wants, even if, or maybe especially if, it is at the expense of an American city that just so happens to be our capital. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.